The last category of drugs I want to talk about are hallucinogens. Hallucinogens are drugs that alter our perceptions, right? And to understand where a lot of this is coming from, I want to pull back and talk about a phenomenon that we see in people called synesthesia. Synesthesia occurs when we combine sensory perception. So what you're looking at here is a series of numbers. Some of these are fives, some of these are twos. My question to you is, what shape do the twos make? Okay, well, that might be a little difficult. Let's try to look here. What shape do the twos make? Well, this one's a lot easier. You can see it's a triangle. Why is the second one so easy? Because they're different colors. What you find in people who are synesthesic, one of the most common forms of synesthesia is what's called color graphing synesthesia. So when they see the number 5 or the number 2, they perceive a color associated with that digit. They know what color it is. They'd see that as black digits against a white background, but they would perceive the 5 and 2 as having a color property in their mind. We know that it's real because they can play this pattern recognition game that we're seeing here with the black and white numbers as if they were in colors. Right? So they are actually combining sensory experiences. To some degree, we all kind of do this. I have two shapes here, a booba and a kiki. Which one of these is the booba? Which one of these is the kiki? Well, this isn't going to work for everybody, and I can't see what you guys are thinking out there, but generally when I ask this in a classroom situation, most people think that the booba is the one on the right, the kiki is the one on the left. Again, not everybody, but why might that be? Well, booba is round, right? Booba sounds round and kiki sounds sharp, right? The one on the right looks round and the one on the left looks sharp. Notice we are combining sensory experiences. Right? Booba sounds round. Kiki sounds sharp. We see synesthesia in young infants, right? Almost all of us are born, as far as we can tell, all infants are born with extreme synesthesia that decreases over time. One of the reasons why infants are so prone to synesthesia is because the brain is so interconnected, it hasn't pruned and shaped itself yet, that it tends to cause activation across the brain anytime there's a sensory stimulation. So we know sort of overactivation of the sensory system leading to multiple sensory modalities being activated at once is the cause of the synesthesia. This is important because this is exactly what we tend to see in hallucinogenic drugs. And it turns out this is something that is modulated heavily by serotonin. And sure enough, drugs that dramatically increase serotonin create hallucinogenic experiences. So what are some of these drugs? Well, some of the most well-known are things, for example, LSD. Lysergic acid diethylamine is a substance that causes strong perceptual changes, hallucinations, mostly visual, sometimes auditory, touch, smell, or even taste. People will often report seeing music or tasting or smelling colors. Right? This was originally derived from a fungus. Interesting enough, many hallucinogens come from funguses. It was discovered by a man named Albert Hoffman, who was exploring a particular fungus called ergot fungus. And he was extracting different derivatives of this, looking actually for a drug to help with birthing pain. And he would then inject it into rats to see what would happen. And it turned out one particular derivative, the 25th derivative, or LSD-25, produced a very weird response in rats. He ignored it, but eventually came back to it, accidentally dosed himself with the drug, and the rest is history. This ergot fungus, though, has a long history to it. It tends to grow in grain, particularly in wet climates. Right? And so many grain storages that would be used to store grain over winter, particularly in agricultural towns, hundreds of years ago who didn't know so much about protecting the grain and avoiding the ergot fungus would open up the grain, see this weird thing growing on it, but have a choice between starving to death or using it to make bread. Well, they'd use it to make bread, and it would cause certain people to just go crazy. They'd see things, they'd hear things, they'd act funny, they'd have disassociations. Well, 500 years ago, how would you explain that? Many people would explain it perhaps as witches or demons. So in fact, there's an argument that many of the witch trials that we see throughout Europe and America are linked to ergotism or ergot poisoning. Right? And particularly the Salem witch trials, several scholars have suggested that it was actually a breakout of ergot poisoning that caused this. We can see the effects of LSD by looking at fMRI machines. We can look at the activation. What we're looking at here are two people being exposed to visual stimuli. The one on the left is sober, one on the right is under LSD. And see the widespread activation of the brain, right? This is what we talked about. Under LSD, the increase in serotonin causes more of the brain to be recruited with a single sensory stimulus, causing the auditory, the touch, the smell, the taste sensory systems to activate, causing the perceptual hallucinations. We see this increase in serotonin and this increase of synesthesia across many hallucinogenic drugs. For example, psilocybin mushrooms. And these are magic mushrooms that contain psilocybin and psilocin, which are hallucinogenic substances that mimic serotonin in the brain. There's been a dramatic increase in research interest in psilocybin mushrooms because some people have thought that it might improve mood, particularly with depression and anxiety. Multiple studies have now shown that a single dose of mushrooms can have antidepressant properties similar to a daily dose of serotonin for 6 months to a year. Right? So there's increased interest in research on this, but the research is fairly minimal and we need to be much more expanded. As I said, many funguses have these hallucinogenic properties. One important mushroom in North America, particularly Canada, is the Amanita muscaria. This is a very hallucinogenic mushroom, but it is also heavily poisonous. However, there are reindeer that can consume it without either the hallucinogenic or the toxic effect. Their stomachs and their liver break down those enzymes, allowing them to consume it safely. Shamans of Inuits who lived around these reindeer realized this fact and began collecting the reindeer, raising the reindeer to consume the Amanita muscaria, and then the shaman would collect the hallucinogenic chemical of the mushroom by collecting the reindeer urine and drinking that. That might seem a bit extreme, but this kind of brings us to an important point about the hallucinogenic experience. People go to extremes to have it because it is an incredibly profound experience for many people. It is associated strongly with a wide range of religious experiences and philosophies and has an incredibly profound effect. And many people tend to seek out and consume hallucinogenic drugs for this profound effect rather than its sort of immediate effect. So someone might do caffeine or cocaine or methamphetamine for the sort of uplift of energy and euphoria and excitement. Somebody might drink alcohol in order to sort of relax or calm down, whereas the hallucinogenic drugs are often driven by these incredibly deep, profound desires for these experiences. And in fact, when we look at improvement of anxiety and depression, it doesn't have a dose response curve. Instead, what we see is that whether or not consuming mushrooms helps somebody with depression or anxiety is more a function of whether or not it was a profound experience. In fact, the more profound the hallucinogenic experience was, the greater the antidepressant and anti-anxiety effect. It's a perceptual shift, as if merging with the cosmic consciousness and feeling at one with the universe changes one's perception for a few months and causes less depression. So it's not just simply taking the drug and the brain chemistry changing, but there's something incredibly important to humanity about the profoundness of this experience that drives us to do things like drink reindeer urine.